If you ever thought, why am I like this? I am out of control. What is wrong with me? I want you to hear this. There is nothing wrong with you. What's happening is simple. Things escalate quickly and your brain takes the fastest route it knows. That is why you see it happening and still not be able to stop it. Most tips and advice out there assumes you will remember those tools amid the chaos, but you and I both know that's exactly when the tools disappear. My work focuses on one thing, the pause, a repeatable skill that helps you stop in your tracks and choose your next move. Because the real win isn't never to mess up, it's catching it sooner, stopping it faster, and knowing how to repair it well. My name is Esther Mbabazi, and I help overworked, stressed out moms who want to stop yelling and hyper-criticizing of their kids. Welcome to today's episode of the Motherhood and the Brain channel. There's a fear I think so many of us mothers carry, even if we never quite say it out loud. Maybe it comes after a hard moment. Maybe it shows up when the house is finally quiet. Maybe it rises when you look at your child and notice something in them that tugs at your heart just a little. And then the thought comes, did I already mess this up? Did the yelling and the over-criticizing, especially in those early years, leave a mark behind? Did I do something lasting? Is it too late now? I think many moms live with that question quietly running in the background of their brain. Maybe because we have heard how important those early years are. Maybe because we've read that those first years are so formative. And somewhere along the way, our hearts and brains took that truth and made it heavier than it was ever meant to be. It turned into this quiet hopelessness, this quiet shame, this quiet blame. I should have known sooner. I should have done better. Maybe I already damaged my child. Something I can't fix. I know that fear. I have seen it in myself and in the other moms that I work with, and I've felt it too. Even after doing this work and growing in different ways, even after watching things become softer and sweeter in my own relationships with my children, that fear still creeps up sometimes. So I want to talk about it gently. Not to brush it aside, not to pretend it doesn't matter, and not to wrap everything up with some neat, polished answer. Just to tell the truth in a way that gives your heart just a little more room to breathe. Because yes, the early years matter deeply, but important does not mean permanent. Formative does not mean fixed. Influential does not mean the story is over. And I think that's something many moms need to hear. I also think many of us have spent so much time blaming ourselves in ways that don't actually help. We look back and think, if only I had known better. If only I had better tools. If only I had known more. If only someone had told me sooner. If only I had the right words in those moments. And yes, sometimes more understanding would have helped. But I think that was always the deepest. I don't think that was always the deepest issue. For many of us, it wasn't simply that we didn't know what to do. It was that in the exact moment when you needed to access that better response, you just could not access that better response. You knew how you wanted to sound, you knew the kind of mother you wanted to be, and you knew you didn't want to keep reacting in the same way. But then that moment would come. The noise, the mess from the kids, the constant needs, the pressure, your child melting down when you're already hanging by a thread, and something in you rose quickly. You could feel it happening, you could hear it in your voice. Part of you could be thinking, I don't want to do this right now, and still feel unable to stop it. And I think that's a part of that is the part that makes this whole thing so painful. Because it's one thing to know what to do, and it is another thing not to know what to do. But when you know what to do and can't access it, that is very painful. And that's why many of these moments feel so defeating in many moms out there, in many of us out there. And I think this fear also cuts so deeply because we look back on ourselves with the eyes we have now, and we judge the woman we were back then. But the woman you were then was living with what she had. She may have been exhausted. She may have been carrying far too much every single day. She may have had very little support. She may have been trying to hold on everything together with no room to fall apart. She may have been repeating patterns she didn't even fully see yet. That doesn't mean every moment was okay. It doesn't mean there is nothing to grieve. It does mean there was context. So many of us were not raising children from a deeply supported, well-held place. We were doing it one thing. We were touched out, overstimulated, under pressure stretched beyond what any person could carry. And often, many of us were doing it with ways of reacting that had been around us for years, ways of reacting that we had grown up around, that we had seen our own parents do, or we had seen our own parents react in those similar ways that we took ahead. We automatically did things the way that our parents did, or our guardians, or anywhere we lived. Ways of speaking that felt normal where we came from, the sharpness that felt familiar, criticism that had been common, silence after hurt that had been ordinary. So when motherhood stretched you in every possible way, those patterns automatically rose up. Not because you didn't love your kids, not because you wanted to cause harm, but because when some human beings are overwhelmed, we often fall back into what is most familiar. And I think this part deserves honesty. I think this part deserves understanding, because shame is not what helps you change. Shame keeps you stuck. It keeps you staring at old versions of yourself, replaying the worst moments and calling that growth. It isn't growth, it's just pain. The early years do matter. Children are learning so much during those years. They are learning about closeness, they are learning about tone, they are learning about relationships, conflict, safety, they are learning about themselves. So yes, those early years matter. But they are not the only years that matter. Children keep growing, they keep changing, they keep responding to what comes next. And what comes next matters. The way you speak now matters, the way you repair now matters, the home you're creating now matters, the softness now matters, the apologies, the new patterns, everything matters. A story does not have to begin perfectly for something beautiful and healing to still unfold in the middle of it. I think we mothers need permission to believe that. Let me repeat, it's very important. A story does not have to begin perfectly for something beautiful and healing to still unfold in the middle of that story. And this is something that I fully believe that many of us moms need permission to believe. Because sometimes we act as though If the beginning was hard, then everything after that is just damage control. That is not true. A child is not finished developing at 7. A child is not fixed in a place because some early years were hard. Your child is still becoming, and so are you. I think one of the hardest parts is when you start looking at your child now and your mind begins gathering evidence. You see them struggle, you see the big reactions, you see the sensitivity, the anger, the tension, the shutting down, whatever big emotion they have, and your mind says, there it is. That's because of you. That's the result. That's what you did. And maybe some of what your child carries has been shaped by what they lived around. That may be true, but there is still a chance this story is not finished. A 6-year-old is not a final draft. A 10-year-old is not finished developing. A teenager is not finished developing. Children change, and so do we. Their needs change, their behavior and understanding changes as they go, as they grow. What you're seeing right now is not necessarily the final word. And this is something that I fully believe moms need to hear. What you're seeing in your child now is not the finished product. It's not too late, it's not over. What happens next still matters. I also want to say something important here. This is not about pretending our actions do not affect our children. They do. And it's not about avoiding responsibility because responsibility feels painful. But blame and responsibility are not the same thing. Blame says, I ruined this. Responsibility says, what can I do now? How do I change the story from here going forward? Blame keeps you frozen. Responsibility lets you move forward. Responsibility does not hold you back. Blame keeps you looking backwards in a way that leaves no room for anything new. Responsibility lets you be honest about the past without living there forever. And I think many moms are afraid that if they stop blaming themselves, they are somehow letting themselves off the hook. But punishing yourself is not the same as changing something. Hurting over it is not the same as healing it. Sometimes self-blame just becomes a place to sit and suffer without ever letting anything truly shift. That is why this matters so much to me. Because yes, the past happened and it mattered. And yes, what you do now matters too. Two things can be true at the same time. I think it also helps to name what so many moms were carrying in those years. Too little rest, too much pressure, no help, too much responsibility, the noise, too much happening inside, like they call it nowadays, the emotional load, and not enough room to recover. That kind of life changes how a person responds if the person does not have awareness. And if on top of all that you were carrying ways of reacting that were handed to you by your guardians and your parents, ways of speaking that felt familiar, and ways of handling stress that you learned simply by living around other people, then of course those things showed up in the way that you are raising your own children. Not because you wanted them to show up, not because you weren't trying, but because that's often what happens when someone is worn down and stretched far too long. And I think this is why so many mothers have had that painful thought, I know better, so why do I still do this sometimes? And maybe part of that answer is knowing something. And maybe part of that answer is that knowing something is not the same as being able to reach that answer in the moment when you need it. Sometimes what is needed most is that tiny bit of space before the reaction takes over. That moment where you catch yourself. That moment where something softens just enough. That moment where you can choose a different way. Not every time, but more than before. And that kind of change matters more than moms even realize. I think a lot of us secretly believe the goal is to never have another hard moment, many of us believe the goal is to never lose it again, but that is not going to be real. We are raising children who have their own brains, who have their own thinking, who are going to challenge us. So the goal is not perfection. The goal is that hard moments no longer define the whole relationship. The goal is that something comes after them. The goal is that something that comes after them now. Reflection, repair, ownership, softer return, different pattern than before. When a mom comes back and says, "I'm sorry, I should have spoken to you like that. That wasn't your fault. I'm trying to do this differently," that matters a lot. When a child begins to experience more gentleness than before, that matters. When the home begins to feel softer than it used to be, that matters. When mistakes are no longer followed by denial or distance, but by repair, that matters. Children are not only shaped by hard moments, they are also shaped by what comes after. And what comes after can hold so much healing for both of us. And beneath all of this, I think, this is just my little opinion, I think there is grief. Grief that you didn't know sooner. Grief that your children got a version of you who was carrying too much. Grief that your love did not always come out sounding loving. There is a grief that there are moments you cannot take back. That grief is real, and I think we need room for it. You are allowed to be sad about the past. You are allowed to wish it had been different. You are allowed to grieve what was hard, but grief does not have to become a life sentence. You can grieve and still believe there is goodness ahead. You can regret and still move forward. You can tell the truth and still believe healing is possible. So maybe when your mind starts spiraling, this is what you come back to. My child's story is still being written. What I do now matters. The early years mattered, and these years matter too. I do not need to be perfect in order to change what comes next. I can be honest without living in shame. It's not too late. So if you're lying awake sometimes, wondering if you already messed everything up, I want to say this to you very gently. Your fear, regret, sadness makes sense. But those feelings are not proof that all is lost. The early years matter, yes, but they are not the only years that matter. Your child is still growing. You are still growing. New patterns can be built. Trust can still be rebuilt. Connection can still deepen. Your home can still become something different from what it was once. Maybe it begins in seeing more clearly. Seeing what was true then and seeing what is true now. And seeing both clearly without being hard on yourself. The story is not over. What happens next matters, and your past does not get the final word. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope a teeny tiny message in this episode helps you find relief. Talk to you again next week. Bye for now.